I would rather 7 days a week and twice on Sunday, a jury imagine fully what you had to go through based on your testimony alone, then have your testimony, have that video, and be like, I don't know, I'm counting 7 seconds in there where he could have, bleh, right?
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about what happens if your family members, maybe your spouse, witnesses a self-defense incident. What should they be saying to the police? And what are the biggest mistake we see people making when it comes to these things? But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And we've heard from several folks, YouTube has unsubscribed you. We'd ask you to check your subscription status. YouTube does that periodically. It seems like we're in some kind of cycle where some big political decisions are going to get made kind of soon. And so we don't want to get siloed with the rest of the independent voices. Check your subscription status. It does help out the channel quite a bit. But this is a question we got, and it has come up in a lot of self-defense cases. You know, the police are standing right there, walking away with your wife, maybe about to talk to you about a self-defense incident. What do you tell her to say to the police?
Well, I think first, before we get there, we have to discuss this little thing in the law called spousal privilege, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we have, I think, this widely misunderstood, even amongst lawyers, because it gets kind of complicated, widely misunderstood view that anything that goes on between husband and wife don't have to testify. Don't worry about
You
it.
can't convict a husband and a wife for the same crime.
Oh, I love that show.
They cannot arrest a husband and wife for the same crime. Yeah, I don't think that that's true, Dad.
Really? I got the worst attorneys.
So what we have actually is spousal privilege primarily for communications between the two of you. So the things that you discuss as husband and wife generally are privileged, and the other spouse does not have to, keyword, have to testify. But who holds the privilege generally, Richard?
It's held by the spouse. Each spouse holds their own privilege. You hold the decision whether or not you want to testify. Your spouse holds the decision whether or not they want to testify.
Right. And I will say, your mileage may vary in exactly how your state's law plays out on this. So we're speaking in generalities, but we have, lots of spouses who have to, particularly in civil cases, have to get up on the stand and testify because it wasn't something the spouses said to one another. It was something they witnessed.
Yeah, and so that's where it breaks down a little bit into what we call testimonial statements and non-testimonial statements. So those private communications you have with your spouse, well, okay, those might be covered by privilege. And some states have protections. In Texas, for example, the state can't call your spouse to testify against you.
In a criminal trial.
In a criminal trial. Let's just say it's your wife. They could waive that and choose to voluntarily testify. They can always change their mind. But then we fall into this kind of second group of non-testimonial. This is just things that they see. That is not implicated by privilege.
It is not. And unfortunately, because, assuming you live in a state like Texas where you are far more protected during a criminal trial. So, everybody says, I'm not going to testify against my husband. And the state's like, okay, we can't make you. You still have this issue of competing criminal and civil trials that comes up for a lot of people. In fact, we've had this issue here in which the criminal trial for the murder is going on at the same time, right? It's contemporaneous with the civil matter for the wrongful death because the bad guy sued you. Well, he didn't sue you from the grave, but his estate has sued you, or his, children, his wife, whomever is actually the person who's allowed by law to sue you.
The baby mama.
The baby mamas, for the wrongful death. So we have that going on contemporaneously, and your spouse is far less protected in that matter. And unfortunately, if discovery and depositions and hearings are going on in that matter, there's nothing to stop the state from going and finding that information. And so they've back-ended spousal privilege. So we got all kinds of problems with spousal privilege.
But there's a bunch of key takeaways from this, and we'll just start with this one, is having a plan prior to, the self-defense incident. Coming up with a plan when your ears are ringing and your eyes are adjusting to the light after a flash. That's not really a good time to be coming up with plans. And so part of this is just having that discussion with your family prior to, hey, if we find ourselves in this situation, what are we going to do? Just like we prepare for hurricanes down here in Houston, you have to have a plan should you find yourself in a self-defense incident. Because I'll say, and we have different experiences on this, and I think we should talk about it. But, anytime you're like, don't talk to the cops in front of the cops, that does not go well.
No, if you just shot someone and then you're like, honey, don't say anything, like, it's not, I mean,
And that happens a lot.
It does. And that is going to, they're going to use that as evidence against you all day long. So, what do you recommend, Richard?
So, obviously coming up with a plan ahead of time, it is important that each person who witnesses the event, say it's all in your family, that you each speak to a lawyer prior to speaking to the police. That's really the headline here. You need to speak to an attorney before talking to law enforcement. And I'll say, and I think we've had different experiences on this, but, I've talked to folks, they're on the phone, police are arriving on scene, maybe they see their wife walking away with the police, and it's, they're saying, hey, what should I tell my wife? And I've done this before, and I've had moderate success, telling the person, and each fact is going to be different, obviously consult with a lawyer, but, tell her that the lawyer wants to talk to you first. I have had moderate success with that. It hasn't gotten me beat up yet in court, but I think your experience is a little bit different.
Oh, yes. I was on a very hostile murder scene once in which lots of the family witnessed the shooting. Unfortunately, it was against another family member, and so it was very dicey. And, I told everyone. They were like, what do we do? And I was like, don't say nothing about nothing unless you're comfortable doing it. But my recommendation would be, and of course, I think I put it artfully in the moment in a way that was not going to get anybody in trouble. But I was like, look, anything you say can hurt this person, can hurt your loved one who had to shoot. And so if you don't want to do that, I recommend not saying anything. And of course, they all, as soon as the police tried to talk to them, were like, the lawyer told me not to talk to you. Just don't say it like that. And so then we had an issue where then the police were threatening the family members. Well, we're going to charge you with the crime because you're not cooperating with us. They're not, by the way. That's an empty threat. They're not going to do that. And then, unfortunately, we got to trial, and the prosecution was really ginned up and really excited because they thought they were going to get to argue to the jury that, basically everybody knew that my guy had messed up, and so the lawyers were conspiring with the family so that nobody said anything because everybody knew how guilty he was, and the lawyers were doing their sneak work to try to protect him. Luckily, the judge actually kept all that out, thank goodness, because there are a lot of judges who would have let that in.
Yeah.
But yes, so my experience is a little bit different. My advice from that experience would be for you to let your spouse or child or whomever witnessed who you trust and who you can prepare with ahead of time. They can say the very basic defensive things that I would tell you to say. My dad had to defend himself. I thought that guy was going to kill my dad. It was really scary. I'm too upset to say anything more right now.
Yeah.
I'll supplement later.
Yeah. My fallback is, hey, I want to help as much as I can, but I have to speak to an attorney first.
Yeah, that's also great. And then they're going to say, you don't need one. You're not in trouble.
Yeah.
And you're going to say, I just watched my husband kill someone. I will give you a full statement, not right now.
Yeah. I think both of those, and each of these are going to be so fact specific. So it's going to, you're going to want to speak to a lawyer about your particular circumstances. But why you invoke an attorney in these situations, when lawyers communicate to the police on your behalf, they can't use what the lawyer says against you. The lawyer is an intermediary here, and they get to choose what information gets disclosed, what information doesn't get disclosed. They get to be this kind of neutral filter, and they get to draw the police's attention to things that are important that maybe aren't being articulated properly by the reporting party. So there's a lot of benefits to getting the lawyer involved.
Yes. Now, I think another thing to prepare with ahead of time is, because this happens quite often, things are going a little bit sideways and your spouse takes out, let's say, a cell phone and starts recording. Because how many times has that happened to us, Richard?
A lot.
A lot.
Too many times.
So
And what I would say is, and we'll link it down in the description below. We just had a great discussion on whether or not you should have a dash camera. And I think, we won't relitigate that whole video. Link that in the description below to check out. The same general rules apply. But the one I think that needs to be pointed out is, notifying or letting the police know you have a video.
yes, do not do that. Do not do that. Do not tell them that you took a video of it until a lawyer has had a chance to review. And I'll tell you, and of course, I am not a fan of the dash camera, which, like,
I'm all right with them.
I know, just for everyone out there who's like, well, that's because Emily's a terrible driver. So,
Prove it.
yeah, can't prove it.
Yeah,
I don't have a dash
Yeah,
camera.
with whose camera?
But I will tell you that I even like a dash camera better than I do a cell phone video of the instant at hand, because the dash camera probably does, it captures it like bad driving behavior. It probably doesn't capture a shooting in self-defense. That shooting in self-defense, I would, and you can all disagree with me, but how many self-defense cases have you tried in front of juries? I would rather 7 days a week and twice on Sunday, a jury imagine fully what you had to go through based on your testimony alone, than have your testimony, have that video, and be like, I don't know, I'm counting 7 seconds in there where he could have, bleh, right? I mean, it is just, they will pick it apart.
Yeah, there is something to that. I mean, and it lines up with the, one story is better than two. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's better than 30 frames a second.
Yep.
But I think the last important consideration, and probably the biggest mistake people make, say you're in a self-defense incident in the home, others present, if they are speaking to an attorney, they make the mistake of talking to the lawyer, maybe on speakerphone or with other people present, and that is a no-go. And so should you find yourself in that situation, it's really important to get someplace private, someplace where nobody else can hear you speaking, where you can talk confidentially with the attorney, because there's another important privilege implicated here. If you're talking to a lawyer and there are other people present, well, all of that confidentiality potentially goes way out the window.
Absolutely. Your spouse can be questioned about what the lawyer said to both of you, because your spouse does not hold that privilege. Nobody wants that.
But having a plan ahead of time, isolating yourself following a defensive incident so you can confidentially communicate with the attorney, those things are so stinking important.
Exactly. Practice what you're going to say to not have to give that statement to the police right away, because in the moment, it's going to be much harder. Think about it now.
Yeah, but we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please question and comment for us below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.